I'm a young guy. I cut my teeth on video games during the Xbox 360 generation. And while it's not the generation that I'm most nostalgic for, it's where the majority of my tastes developed. That means I missed some stuff. The majority of the games I've played were console games from, say, 2005 and up. So when I got a low-end gaming laptop that I pretend is for editing videos, I started accumulating games. Digital games, that is. From like Steam or GOG or, God forbid, Origin, and did what everybody does, which is called buy them and never play them. And so they were just floating around their respective libraries, occasionally getting installed and uninstalled depending on my mood, waiting for a day that would likely never come. The day when I finally ran out of things to play. But that day finally came. It started with Half-Life. Beyond Resident Evil and Metroid, Half-Life is probably my biggest video game blind spot. I played maybe a couple hours of 2 in high school and frequently blew through Portal on weekends, but being primarily a console gamer, it was never easy to play Half-Life 1 in a way that wasn't swamped with issues. After a long day of working at home, I picked up my laptop, plopped down on my couch, and booted up the tutorial for it just to see if it was actually playable. I didn't have anywhere else to be, so why not? The next thing I knew, it was 9 o'clock, and by the end of the week, I'd finished it. It was everything I liked about, like, Michael Crichton, maybe even Stephen King novels I've been reading, and everything I enjoyed about FPSs from the era, while also, doing more. Getting rid of the red key, blue key, and actually having puzzles and platforming and interesting boss encounters. Half-Life fucking unfolds, and I could feel its influence on loads of games that I enjoyed, and the pacing of it was absolutely impeccable. I know that it doesn't need my praise, but it's definitely earned it. From there, it was an explosion of 1990s and early 2000s PC shooters. Duke Nukem 3D came next, a surprisingly fast and absurd shooter that I'd always assumed was the video game equivalent to a dick joke. Unlike Doom and even Half-Life, Duke was having you blow through local cities and environments that felt grounded, alongside these over-the-top science fiction spaces. And after that came F.e.a.r, then Crisis, a no-holds-barred, no-real order retrospective on where shooters came from and what made them not suck. And surprisingly, I was actually finishing these games. In an age where the average title seems to go on for somewhere between 10 and 45 hours, these not bite-sized but definitely smaller games made me feel like I was always making progress, always moving forward, and most importantly, always having fun. I wasn't the one setting the pace like in open world games, and at a time when my personal productivity was at an all-time low and my anxious energy was at an all-time high, it was a really nice balance. I always feel like I'm in a constant state of looking for the next game to play. I'm always planning ahead several games in advance and then I never end up getting to any of them. But this was easy to me because the investment both monetarily and timely, was always pretty low, keeping me pushing forward. Since I moved to the current generation, I'd forgotten how integral these types of games were to me as a gamer. For the past few years, I've been really trying to define and predict what types of games I enjoy. One second, I'll really enjoy a 2D platformer, but when I try a different one, I like them all less. I understand that quality fluctuates between games and that genre conventions are basically useless beyond a classification system, but when people, literally my dentist at one point asked me, "What types of games do you play?" I usually stumble my way through an explanation. With films, books, or music, I have an answer. Usually it's just science fiction, but with games, the biggest thing I know is what I don't like, which is usually survival horror, RTSs, and full motion video games or something. Dakota talks about Bartle's taxonomy a lot, this big long way of classifying the type of gamer you are that then points you towards games you might like. But I just don't feel like I fit in any one of those categories at all. So I'm stuck Googling games like blank over and over again until I find something similar. It's weird. This is probably why I obsess over individual studios more than anything. I didn't want to be one of those I like all games except country types though. And while I definitely don't think that I'm primarily a player of FPS games, I always thought that these types of games didn't exist anymore. Like single-player, linear shooters without lame skill trees or unnecessary open worlds. But as I skewed more and more modern, I learned something. These types of games, the first-person, non-contemporary, or historically military shooters, still existed. I knew Wolfenstein and Doom were around, but playing the incredible campaign for Titanfall made me realize something. For a long time, I used to have an episode titled "Are Shooting Games Stale?" on my long list of ideas, nestled between a Shadow the Hedgehog 2 video idea and dinosaurs in video games. This isn't a joke at all. The short answer was always, well, No. But going through FPSs like this made it sort of feel like it was rooted in an attitude that was, I was born in the wrong generation, I guess. Like, yeah, there are no more good shooters anymore. The only good ones existed before I was born, or in my case, before I was allowed to blow aliens' heads off. Which really isn't the case, necessarily. While there are far too many FPSs focused on multiplayer PvP and too many single-player campaigns that are open-world third-person action games, but like with crappy pop music, once you start digging around, there's swamps filled with just all-around good-ass FPS games. Not just in the AAA market, but also indies, often inspired by those games that I loved playing in the past few months. Ion Fury, Amid Evil, Dusk, and pretty much anything that New Blood is working on wears their influences on their sleeves. And while it's no longer the absolutely bonkers FPS arms race we saw in the 90s and early 2000s, it's still nice to see developers reminding players that FPS shooters can have good single-player moments again. And while they don't always do super well in the AAA market, seeing Titanfall and Doom being these large-scale versions of that is super nice. And I long for more of that. There wasn't a single moment of the Titanfall campaign where I didn't have a smile on my face. It was fast, I was firmly in control, and it never outstayed its welcome. And having recently played Jedi Fallen Order, I'm really impressed with how great of developers Respawn are, and I long for more single-player games from them. On a Star Wars note, I did play through the campaign of Battlefront 2 in the midst of this, and I definitely didn't hate it. Recently, I've picked up some multiplayer first-person shooters as well. I've never really had friends to do that with, but on a whim when it was on sale, Dakota and I picked up Borderlands 3 and started playing with our friend Matt. And while Borderlands is much more complicated and less linear and maybe a start to decline in like linear FPSs, having the volume down and having someone as experienced as Matt playing alongside us has been pretty great. Honestly, Matt is one of the best Borderlands players around, and he's dragging us along like a teacher on a field trip or a really damn good dungeon master. It's super nice. Despite being people who text almost every day, I don't get to talk to the fellas as much as I'd like to. And like us playing this and paying no attention to what's actually going on is super nice. We also play Call of Duty now, which is less nice. I'm not very good at zombies, and I feel like I'm being carried through like a sack of potatoes. I had forgotten how easy shooters make it to switch off my brain and be immersed. But spending about 3 or 4 hours a day and experiencing something that had linear goals and forward momentum, and again wasn't dependent on me setting the pace, made for the exact experiences I longed to have again. I'm not gonna lie to you, it's been a bit bumpy lately. I had big videos and bigger trips planned throughout the year that simply won't happen. People say that the bumpiness is over here, but data seems to say otherwise. I've had some pretty frantic moments throughout my personal life, and I'm just pretty damn tired. It's a very privileged thing to complain about how I can't travel or whatever, but even with the world reopening, I feel trapped. And that's by no means something that's unique to me. I'm in a fairly good position, my lack of a primary care doctor aside. I didn't lose my job, and honestly, I'm not a very social person outside of the internet. And with the way I answer DMs, some could say I'm not social on the internet either, but that's beside the point. But like using FPS games as a way to get the hell off of Twitter or no longer feel anxious about like being productive with all that extra time we have or whatever, and these shorter gaming binges have been super nice. I recognize that this is the exact same reason I was super invested into the 3DS in late 2018. And maybe that's a bigger personal problem that I shouldn't be unpacking on a small YouTube channel. But like, commodify your anxieties for likes on the internet, I guess. I'm telling you that for a long time, video games have been pushing towards bigger and better experiences, more open and more wide. And while I wouldn't consider myself to be on the absolute cusp of gaming tech, I mean, I bought the PS4 Slim, it sounds like a goddamn jet engine anytime I try to play anything that came out after 2018, but nonetheless, I'm pretty hip, like, I'm pretty cool, I'm pretty swag, and I'm honestly more than a little tired of being given games that end with me being bored and not me finishing them. And like, yeah, I could have used that 40 hours in the middle that I did a full playthrough of New Vegas to do a full playthrough of something I haven't finished upwards of 5 times, like Red Dead Redemption 2, those new Tomb Raider games, or Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which I had just bought, or some other game that I've wanted to cover here for years, but nonetheless, I did what I wanted. And it reminded me of why I like short, linear, and fun first-person shooters for the first time in a bit. Also, I spent all day trying to figure out how to get Quake to run with the original soundtrack because I really like 9 Inch Nails, and I got it to work finally. It gets a thumbs up from me. It's really cool. I'm basically a professional modder. Hey, thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, you should definitely go check out this video about Wii first-person shooters. It's kind of similar.